Do you think you can work out when a piece of music is written just by listening to it? Well, today I've put together a challenge and I'm going to challenge myself and you to beat me. So here are the rules. I've put together an app that will play me 10 short 15-second clips from random parts of different pieces. For each clip, I have to guess which period of music that piece is from. And there are 5 options. There is Baroque, classical, romantic, late romantic, or impressionism. And then there is modern music. If I get the period correct, that is 1 point. And if I get the period wrong, but I am neighboring the correct period, then I get half a point. And then after that, I will try and also guess the exact composer, which is much harder. So if I get that correct, then that's 2 points. But there is also the possibility of red herrings, which means pieces that sound like they're from a different period. For the entire challenge, there is a total possible of 30 points, which is 3 points per clip. And at the end, I'm going to see where I and you stack up on this score chart. So let's get into it. Okay, round 1. Okay, so I'm fairly confident on the period for this one. It's definitely not Baroque, because Baroque has more interweaving melodies. It's kind of very measured. Classical is very structured. The Romantic period is expressive. It makes a lot of musical sense. And then in late Romantic, impressionistic style music, it's either French, so it sounds kind of almost jazzy in a way, but very kind of laid back, or it sounds kind of Russian and slightly odd. But this sounds very odd. So it's got to be 20th century modern. And it is. So it says, sparse textures, open intervals, and austere dissonance give this piece a distinct, modern, almost architectural sound. Wow, so to make this app, I got AI to pick the pieces and write the descriptions, and it clearly needed a thesaurus to do it. What does architectural sound mean? Whatever it means, it doesn't matter because I have 1 point. But now I've got to guess a composer from the modern period that might write a piece like that. The fact that it's piano, it kind of limits who it could be, but not by as much as I like, and I don't know that many modern composers really. So I'm gonna guess Copland. And the reason for that is because he does write very bizarre music, but it's almost very rhythmic in nature, which is what this was. Although I could be way off. Wow. Okay, that is probably going to be the one and only time that I guess a composer right, and I can't believe it was in the modern period. So it says, Copland's piano variations are fiercely modernist, far from his later Americana, exploring stark rhythm and intervallic design. I mean, the wording of these is crazy. Intervallic design. But yeah, exploring stark rhythm makes sense. So right now, I'm on full points. I've got 3 out of 3. 2 for the composer, 1 for the period. Let's go for round 2. Interesting. Okay. So my first thought was that it's probably late romantic kind of impressionist style of music because it sounds kind of warm and very flexible. It was using the circle of fifths, which you get in jazz quite a lot. That kind of pattern. But then at the end, it did go kind of weird. So it could be late romantic impressionist. It could be modern, but I'm going to guess late romantic impressionist. Modern. Okay, I'll take the L. So it says, bittersweet harmonies with chanson-like melody show a 20th century mix of popular style and classical refinement. Now, chanson-like is a very interesting choice of words because chanson is French for song, I believe, which means it's song-like. But that's making me think that it's probably a French composer. And I'm trying to think which French composers would be considered to be modern composers opposed to impressionist composers. And I actually wouldn't know where to draw that line, really. So I'm just going to guess Ravel, because Ravel does occasionally put some weird stuff into his pieces, but that is most likely wrong. Poulenc, okay. Poulenc's piano work often fuse cabaret lightness with sincere lyricism, switching mood with its disarming ease. Okay. Yeah, Poulenc is not someone that would be the first person that comes to mind when I am trying to guess a composer, but it kind of does make sense. So that gives me half a point for the era because I was a neighbouring period of music. I said late romantic impressionism, so that neighbours modern, which gives me half a point. And then I get a big fat 0 for the composer. Okay, on to number 3. That was quite difficult to hear. My immediate thought is it sounded quite measured, quite somber, lyrical in a way, but I'm not confident, but that's what I'm going to guess. Romantic. Nice. It's very difficult because with 15 seconds in the middle of a piece of music, it takes it out of context, so you could get a section of the music that doesn't make much sense until you hear the wider context. But that's what makes the game challenging, right? So I'll take the point for the romantic, but then I've got to guess the composer. I'm going to guess Schumann. Tchaikovsky. Wow. Okay. You see, that to me didn't sound anything like what I would think of when I think of Tchaikovsky. When I think of Tchaikovsky, I think of, obviously, ballet, for a start, like Swan Lake. Or I think of the Tchaikovsky piano concerto, which has got a big sound to it. This sounded quite somber, and it is Romance in F minor, so that does make sense. But it definitely wasn't in any kind of list of composers in my head. And it says, Tchaikovsky's piano works share the emotional directness of his ballets and symphonies, favouring memorable melody over complexity. Fair enough. Okay, on to number 4. Another tough one. The first thing that came to my head was it sounds quite nationalistic. It sounds almost Russian, which is making me think either romantic or late romantic, somewhere in that period. Although it could very easily be someone like Shostakovich, for example. But it did sound a bit too consonant to be Shostakovich, maybe. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to lock in romantic, because I think, although it sounded like it could be on the later end of romantic, I still think romantic is probably a good bet. And it is. And it says, stomping rhythms, modal inflections, and colourful harmonies evoke romantic nationalism and folk-inspired character writing. So I pretty much nailed that. So that begs the question, what nation are we being nationalistic about? And I do associate that with more Eastern European, kind of Russian vibes. It sounds way too consonant to be this person, but I'm going to guess it anyway because of the nationalism, and I'm going to say Wagner, even though it is definitely not Wagner, because Wagner's much too dissonant for this style. It's Grieg. Okay, that makes sense. Grieg's lyric pieces capture Norwegian folklore and landscape in miniatures, full of vivid, rhythmic, and harmonic colour. Yeah, so that's a me problem. I need to stop thinking of Russia when I hear the word nationalism. And I also know this piece, March of the Trolls, so I don't know why I did not get that. But I'll take the point for romantic. On to number 5. Wow, interesting. Okay. So my immediate thought, once again, is romantic. It sounds very wavy, piano, and also expressive. Now, my immediate thought when I think of romantic piano pieces is usually Chopin, but I don't think this is Chopin, because Chopin doesn't kind of write this way. But it could be Brahms, Schumann, Schubert, anyone like that. But let's lock in romantic first. Classical. Interesting. Okay. So I was in a neighbouring period there, so I get half a point. But it says regular phrasing and clear harmonic progressions show classical roots, while little rhythmic quirks hint at Beethoven's personality. So this is Beethoven then. That's kind of sneaky if it is Beethoven, because Beethoven was at the end of the classical period and the start of the romantic period. He was kind of the composer that shows the difference between the two periods. So you could classify him as either one of those depending on the piece and the context. Having said that, because we're hearing a random snippet in the middle of a piece, it doesn't sound very Beethoven-esque. Beethoven to me has much more contrasting dynamics, but you're not necessarily going to hear that when you hear 15 seconds in the middle of the piece. But I would have guessed someone like Schubert, probably. So if it is Beethoven, which I assume it is, then I wouldn't have got the point anyway. And it is, and it's an early piece. Beethoven's bagatelles are miniatures where he experiments with character and rhythm within tight classical form. So it does make sense that it's called the classical period when it's an early Beethoven piece. Okay, number 6. Okay, interesting. So I heard a harpsichord in there, and that would tell me that this is probably the Baroque period, because the Baroque period, it wasn't before the piano, but most pieces were written for the harpsichord rather than the piano. So I will lock that in. And I'm also going to lock in a composer. And I'm going to say I don't think this is Bach, because it sounds too measured, homophonic, although it very well could be. I am going to guess Handel. So firstly, Baroque. And it is. And it says, this clear ritornello structure and graceful melodic lines, a continuo bass placed this firmly in the late Baroque concerto idiom. Gosh, that was hard to say. And that does make sense. But let's see if it is Handel. Telemann. Okay. Viola concerto. Interesting. Telemann's concertos balance approachable melody with elegant craftsmanship, often spotlighting less typical solo instruments. Yeah, Telemann is someone who I would probably never guess as well. When you think Baroque, you think Bach. So it's Bach and Bach's friends. But it does give me another point for Baroque. So let's go on to number 7. Interesting. Okay. So the recording of this sounds kind of janky. I am tempted to say the classical period for this. It could be the Baroque period. It's definitely not any later than that, I wouldn't say. And that's because it also had very measured phrasing. So it kind of had one phrase that ended with a perfect cadence, and then it moved on to a second phrase. So that to me is making me think maybe the classical period. But it could have originally been written for harpsichord, and it could be earlier. So let's go for classical. Baroque. Wow, yeah. I'm just glad that the logic followed, even if I am wrong. A simple dance theme is ornamented and reharmonized through variations, a favorite Baroque way of showing invention. And once again, we wouldn't know that based on a 15-second clip. But that gives me another half point. So then we ask, who wrote the piece? And for this, I am going to say Bach, because Bach did write a lot of pieces for harpsichord and keys. Wow, okay. Jean-Philippe Rameau. Gavotte with variations. Rameau, I hope I'm saying that name right, both theorist and composer, brought sophisticated harmony and theatrical flair to French keyboard and stage works. Someone that I would never ever guess, so I'm quite happy to take the loss for that one. So far, I only have 2 points for composer on the first question. All of the other ones, I haven't got the composer right. Wow. Okay, that is probably going to be the one and only time that I guess a composer right. And I think I've got the era right half the time. And being in a neighboring era the other half the time. Okay, number 8. Okay, so this to me is the Romantic period. This is kind of very typical of the Romantic period. If it's not the Romantic period, I'll be shocked. It sounds quite solemn and dark, although it is very measured. It almost has that Moonlight Sonata kind of flavor to it in a way. So this could very well be Romantic Beethoven. But either way, I'm going to lock in the Romantic period, and I think I'm actually going to guess someone different from Beethoven, even though it could be. And I think I'm going to say Brahms, because to me, Brahms is a very textured composer. So it is the Romantic period. A cantabile melodic line floating over gentle accompaniment typifies romantic song-like piano writing. And that is true. That's exactly why I thought it was, because you get this style of piano writing quite a lot in the Romantic period. So is it Brahms? Mendelssohn, Song Without Words, of course. Mendelssohn's Songs Without Words crystallize his refined lyrical style, bringing vocal expressiveness to the keyboard. Yeah, and once again, that is something that I might have guessed had I heard more of the piece, because I might have heard more of the melodic line throughout the music, whereas in this particular situation, it just sounded like chords were being outlined and arpeggiated. But I'll take the period. Number 9. Once again, this could be classical, it could be romantic. It's not Baroque, it's not late romantic, and it's not modern. It's just between the two. Could be like a Haydn sonata, for example. But I hear pieces like this, and I do think of that like early to mid 1800s. So I am torn. I think I am going to have to say, just because I felt like the music was going somewhere bigger, although the phrasing sounds classical to me, I'm going to say romantic. And I'm glad I did. The shifting inner voices and restless modulations hint at Schumann's poetic, introspective, romantic language. Wow, so it's given away the composer there. But it is romantic, which is good. So I'll take the point. And because it's given away the composer, I'm not going to take the points because that would be unfair. And it was Schumann. Schumann's character pieces often juxtapose tenderness and agitation, reflecting his literary imagination and inner contrasts. There's just too much going on in that sentence. We go on to number 10, the final clip. So I actually know this, which is great for me because that means it gives me the point. So this is Impressionist, and this is Debussy Reverie. There you go, Impressionist. Parallel chords, blurred pedal, and modal touches give this piece its dreamlike impressionist atmosphere. And the composer, Debussy Reverie. Debussy's early Reverie already hints in his late style, prioritizing color and mood over traditional tonal direction, which is exactly true, and that's what makes it impressionist. So that has given me 3 points in that last question, which I needed. That means that I finish with a total of 12.5 points out of 30, which is pretty dismal, and that makes me an accompanist. I didn't realize that it was possible to be offended by your own challenge. Yet here we are, being called an accompanist by myself. If you were also playing, let me know in the comments if you beat me and what score you got. And also if you want to see me do something like this again. And if you want to see me compare 3 versions of the same piece played for different sets of instruments, one for piano, one for orchestra, and one for a soloist with an orchestra, then head on through and I will see you there.